Church family, we are coming to you in a little bit of a different format. One of the things that has been suggested is maybe that we do a weekly video that would be a mixture of us, where we're talking about maybe a specific topic or specific issue that's going on. And so Gary and I get the privilege of kicking this off, and these will come out later in the week, and BJ will send you an email regarding when these videos will be out. And so we thought this week we would discuss the pandemic, COVID-19, in particular about how Christians should handle and think through the issues that surround the pandemic. And so that's one of the things that we're going to kick this off with. Next week will be something different, and these topics will range on from something maybe theological to current issues, how to think through that biblically, to maybe something that's going on in the life of our church. So we're going to kick it off this week, and so I'm kind of moderating this week, so I get to ask Gary anything that I want, and I do have some questions in here for him that he doesn't know about. But let's start off. I do want to start off just by asking, why do you think that COVID-19 and opinions on how Christians should respond to COVID-19, and I'm specifically thinking about should we defy the government and go out in public? Should we shelter in place? And there seems to just be extreme opinions on this. Before we get biblical on this, why do you think that there are such varying opinions of how this should be handled?
Well, what is interesting is I've even stopped listening to the news because there are varying opinions about what the facts on the ground are, and how the facts are to be measured, how they're to be weighted, whether we're to be looking at the number of cases, whether to be looking at the number of hospitalizations, looking at the number of deaths. So it's just been kind of a very fluid mixture of ways in which people are evaluating the seriousness of the threat and trying to navigate wisdom of keeping ourselves inside versus making sure that we are engaged in life as opposed to hiding away from our normal routines that are appropriate and God ordained. So it's kind of crazy to think that the facts aren't always just the facts.
Yeah, I had a hermeneutics professor that, in talking about hermeneutics, said where you start is where you'll end up. And meaning that whatever biases you're bringing to the Bible, then your reading of the Bible will shape that. I've come and said, I think with life it's that way too. Politics and social issues. And so I think how someone probably started thinking at the beginning of this pandemic shapes where they'll end up and how they're listening to people talk. And then you have news agencies, and this has gotten political. It's fascinating. It's actually very sad and heavy.
Well, yeah, it's alarming
that it's gotten political. And so if you tend to be more left-leaning, that you're supposed to act and react one way. If you're more right-leaning, you're supposed to act and react that way, which blurs, what are the facts. And it seems like, and I hear you saying this, and I certainly believe this, it seems like that we just don't know. There's just a lot about this we have no clue about, and that the doctors seem to be saying the same thing.
Right. I was thinking as you were preaching through the passage this past Sunday, if I were to hear the phrase that you uttered about something along the lines of, 5 weeks ago, or 9 weeks ago, or 12 weeks ago, and even the term COVID-19, if we were to go back, we would have no idea what we're talking about.
Right.
Everything has changed, and the ways in which we have been navigating this have really been somewhat bizarre. It's interesting, though. The point that you're making is that people do have preconceived notions about what our responsibilities should be. And what we're trying to do is just to do the things that are a part of life the best that we can. And one of the things that's, I think, is very biblical about the way that we make decisions is we make the best decisions that we can, informed by Scripture, informed by wisdom, based on the information that we have at the time. And I think the Lord's just fine with that.
Is that obviously not with the COVID-19 pandemic, but making the best decision that we can, as biblically informed as we can make it? Is that kind of behind Luther's quote of "sin boldly"?
Yes, I think it is.
of that there are some things that we're not going to be sure of, and so think through it, think biblically, and then when you act
in faith.
In faith.
Aware that you may have to back off and readjust and re-navigate. So anyway, so that I think you're right.
One of the things we keep talking about as a staff, and as people ask questions about, Vacation Bible School or Reach or Sunday school or nursery, is that one of the things that I love about the size of our church is that we can be flexible, which means it's a little bit easier to make decisions based upon changing information of the time, so that because one of the things that I really want our people to know is that that really that we don't have biases that are driving our decisions, but that we're really trying to figure out what's going on in the state of Tennessee, Chattanooga, Signal Mountain, make the best decisions that we can make, but we're always ready to pull back if we need to. So if there was if something changed, we can pull back and go back to online only.
Right. And we've talked to the doctors in our church. We've looked at the guidelines that have been put out federally. We've looked at the guidelines that have been put out by Governor Lee and the suggestions that have been made there. And we will act accordingly and do the best that we can to hopefully get back to a place where we can worship face to face.
Yeah. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about, and I know that, and it's interesting maybe us having this conversation because our social media imprint is very small or non-existent, because you don't Facebook very often.
No.
Yeah, and I don't have I have a deactivated Facebook account that I will go back onto.
When you unfriended me, I just said,
that was it. That was it, right?
What's the point?
So when
maybe at this point it's appropriate for me to mention that the last devotional that I did outside, and when I was trying to finish up the last devotional last week, somebody was running behind BJ. And I'm not going to mention which senior pastor that was. It was hard for me to keep focused.
I just needed to brighten your day. Needed to brighten your day.
It made me laugh.
But neither one of us are on social media. However, I have had a lot of folks tell me that the intensity of debates about what we should do in light of the COVID-19 is just insane. That there are very strong opinions, that people are using that platform in a way to try to argue and to kind of shout one another down over those things. So I do want to ask the question and be helpful. I guess two things come to mind. One, why do we think that social media becomes the outlet through which people really want to give their opinions? And then number two, how do we instruct Christians, particularly people in our church, of how they should live out their lives on social media?
Oh boy, both of those are loaded. I'm not sure I have an answer for number one. Let me go for number two.
Okay.
And that is that Philippians 4:5 says, "Let your sweet reasonableness be known to all men."
Mm-hmm.
And whatever ways you react to people who disagree with you on social media, if it's an appropriate response, I mean, if it's an appropriate thing to respond to, and you feel like, okay, I really should make a statement on this for whatever reason. I'm not sure why you'd ever want to respond to social media. But if there's it's an appropriate time to respond, then I think that it's important to make sure that your words not only are sweet and reasonable, but when you follow the guidelines in Ephesians 4 and Ephesians 5, make sure that your words build. Make sure that they're not. So many people, from what I understand, and I have seen some tags that have, some strings that have gone below articles that were posted. They're really bitter. And you read some of those, and even though I agree with them, I kind of wish they weren't on my side.
Right.
Because of the tone of the thing. That's just not the way that people who follow Jesus Christ need to be interacting with others that they don't even know. Yeah.
I think social media becomes an easy platform to scream opinions because it's so impersonal.
Yeah. And everybody's on the same level too.
Right. Yes. And so and you can have an emotional response to something and boom, send something out, and really quickly. And I agree with you that I am amazed. I'm amazed at how often in the New Testament that as Christians we are instructed to live humbly, to be people who build one another up, to be someone who goes out of their way to show love and gratitude. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have opinions. We should, but it means that the way that we express those can be from a good, sincere, loving place. I would also say...
Let me jump in here and say, and it's also so easy to misunderstand.
Yes.
Someone, or to be misunderstood. And when you post things, I was listening to something actually today as I was driving up here on a podcast that mentioned that when you're talking about communication, I've forgotten exactly the percentages, but 7% of communication is the actual words that are used. The rest of it has to do with tone of voice, it has to do with facial gestures, and all the things that are absent from social media. All you've got in social media is a 7%.
Yes.
If that's accurate. So, that you're not doing much communicating there.
And that's where I was going. I would urge our people that if they find themselves feeling like they need to respond to someone, to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Call face to face and say, hey, I read this and it, I'm concerned, and here's why I'm concerned, and do it out of love and care. Because I know for me, even there have been times I've gotten emails, and my first reaction, gut reaction to the email might have been anger and frustration. But then as I went back and read the email a couple more times more carefully, it was like, oh, no, this is littered with kindness and generosity. Maybe I'm misreading this. Maybe there's something going on in me that's...
But when you make that phone call and you still disagree, you let it go.
You let it go. Right. You let it go. Just a couple more things here. One is, so I, as I've said a couple times and said yesterday morning, I think it's very okay on this issue of how as a church or as Christians we're responding to this, whether or not we're on the side of kind of following the governor's recommendations and getting out and doing that, or whether we're on the side of hey, I just don't think it's safe and it's things are going to get really bad. I think that there is we can be flexible with one another with wherever we land. And from what I see and what I hear, there is no right. There's no biblical... The only biblical command that I see is that we are trying to obey the governing authorities, and we don't believe that the governing authorities are coming in and saying you can't meet, or that they're trying to suppress religious activity for the sake of stopping the spread of the gospel.
Right. There's no civil disobedience that's in this mix at all.
No. Right. On the other side, I think it's very okay if someone says, hey, for the love of neighbor, I just don't think it's wise to kind of venture out, and I'm going to still. I know that Governor Lee has said, I just read a minute ago that swimming pools in Chattanooga are going to open back up, and some people may think that's crazy and not visit a swimming pool, and that is okay.
As long as you social distance 6 feet.
Well, it was interesting because there was a recommendation on masks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it had to specify when you're talking to one another, but when you're swimming, don't wear a mask.
Yeah. Okay.
So
good.
that's good to know.
Unless it's a breather.
Yes. Yeah. So just and I know I think you feel the same way as well, that there is a fairly wide margin here for us to have differing opinions on and still love one another well without either side getting into the wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did a wedding this past Saturday, Sam and Katie Jones, and I was very surprised that there were a number of people who attended. I was very surprised that very few people had masks, and but there was no, I don't think anybody looked at the group of people that were gathered and thought, they are violating some social norm, even a newly created social norm. There was one young couple there that had masks on, and Betsy and I were talking about it as we were driving back home. They were so young, but you look at them and you say, okay, what if that girl is the caregiver for an elder, or maybe she's in cancer treatments. There's so many things that we don't know that we really should not assume. Therefore, we should not make judgments about those things.
Yeah. So,
and in our case, we want to be as careful as possible because we have a lot of people to love on here.
Absolutely. And so, just real quickly, again, we just want to take just a couple more minutes. I have two questions. One would be to just talk a little bit about why we made the decision to go ahead and to follow the governor's recommendations and to open up. And maybe I'll start off on that as well. That I know as elders we felt like that really all we were doing was giving the people the option of whether they wanted to meet in person or stay home and to continue to watch via live stream, and that we do feel like that the in-gathering meeting is important, is God ordained, and so if we can
and will be the goal.
And will be the goal. And if we can do that safely within the civil authorities' recommendations, that we're going to go ahead and to slowly do that without any hint of judgment on those who aren't comfortable coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the policy that we began with, and that's the policy we're going to continue.
Right. The last thing, I have heard it rumored that that during the time when we were doing live stream only, that you were in person at a service without a tie on.
Was that a question or a statement?
It was one of the highlights of my. It was one of the. I thought for a moment you had. Well, and it's funny.
This is blessed be the time.
Yes. And it's funny you say that, and we will end on this. I do just want to make this statement because I've had several people ask me this. Several people, even in our congregation, who have asked me about the decision to reopen and what we're doing, is that they've asked, is this a weaker brother issue, whether or not somebody comes or not? And the hard thing is, and I'll just say it publicly here, is I've resisted answering that question because the next question that somebody wants to ask is, well, who's the weaker brother? And so...
Well, it's always the other person.
It's always the other person. And so I think from the I do think it probably fits within those confines. However, what I would say is that if you have an opinion, then I do think the person who has the opposing opinion, that you want You want to treat them as the Bible would tell you to treat the weaker brother, with charity, with love, and with understanding, and not try to figure out who's right or wrong.
Right. Yeah. This is hopefully, Lord willing, a short-term thing, and we're not going to figure out all the answers to all the questions that could be asked. There will be a lot of retrospectives on all of this at every level, including for us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, was this the right time?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the right way? But again, to come back to the point that, before God and under the appropriate leadership of the governing authorities and scientific community, what the doctors have suggested to us, we're doing the best that we can with the information that we have at the time.
Yeah.
And so if people will be patient with all of us and with one another, we'll do fine.
We will. So, all right. Well, thank you, and that concludes our time today. We went over the time that we thought we were going to go, but I hope this was a blessing to you.
That pesky question about ties.
Oh, I thought it was you talking about the person running behind you that took us out of time.